examining the legacy of Charlie Kirk. Was he really the man of God and the martyr that Christians are painting him to be, or something else? We're going to listen to Charlie Kirk in his own words. The man that said blacks had it better in the 1940s because we committed less crimes. We're going to look at the things that he said and look at actual statistics and data.
Half of all prisoners are black. Exactly. So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders. That's not a war on drugs, that's a culture problem.
Okay, so let's talk about that culture. Black people have been legislatively subjugated up until 1965. I'll give it, honestly, it's later, but let's just say 1965. You do not think that 10 generations of legislative subjugation and slavery during that time, 4,000 black men, women, and children are lynched as a result of race riots in this country? You do not think that these things have a lasting effect? We have had 10 generations of subjugation and 4 of legislative freedom.
Of course they have an impact, but it's more on you to explain why things got worse since the Civil Rights Act. More violent, less fathers around, poorer. Why is that?
And that's exactly what I'm going to explain in this video. Now, Charlie Kirk has been on record for saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake. And here he's repeating this same rhetoric that it's a mistake because black people were more poorer and they had less fathers in the home and there was a higher level of violence. So we're going to look at why is that. Now I want to address a statement that he made in a different video, also combined with this video, in which he said in the 1940s that blacks had it better off because more father figures were in the home and there was more wealth. And I want to start off with the wealth. How come it is that black people would go from having more wealth in the early 1900s to all of a sudden the wealth dropping? What happened? What is the cause and what is the reason behind the wealth disparity between white people and black people? Now let's start off simply. Imagine you are living in Africa. You are enjoying wealth and many resources, gold and diamonds. You're not struggling in poverty, but you're enjoying yourself and you have all that you could ever desire. But one day colonizers come to your country. They kidnap your people. All your wealth is plundered, stolen. Your women are raped. Your people are enslaved. And once you get to the Americas, you suffer, you are brutally subjugated for years, for centuries, 400 years, not 5, not decades, but centuries. And you are left feeling discouraged because of all of the suffering that your people have to go through. And after all those years of slavery, you still have to deal with Jim Crow. You still have to deal with violence. You still have to deal with lynchings. You still have to deal with those things. Are you going to give up? Most people would say, yes, if I had to go through that, I would give up. But what did African Americans choose to do instead, despite not having the same head start as white Americans? Well, let's look at Black Wall Street in the early 1900s. It was an economic powerhouse. In the early 20th century, the Greenwood district in Tulsa was a thriving community with 108 black-owned businesses, including hotels, restaurants, retail shops, and professional services like lawyers, doctors, and dentists. Black people were thriving. Black people were relying on themselves. Black people were enjoying, and you can find this with many other historical resources in the 1900s. You can find many other versions of Black Wall Streets, and you can see the wealth and the affluence that black people had during this time, despite the fact of all the subjugation that black people have gone through, being stripped of our name and our culture and everything taken away from us, and the fact that they have tried to destroy the family structure, which we're about to get to address his other point. And now the question is, well, what happened to all of these things? I wonder what happened. Why all the change? The prosperity of Greenwood was destroyed in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, where mobs of white people murdered black residents and burned the entire 35-block district. You see this? There is even reports that Abraham Lincoln tried to give black people money after slavery, but white people squandered all the wealth of black people. So we can see the squandering, the stealing, and the violence, yet you can sit up here and say blacks are more violent than white people. And you want to talk about black people are so poor, but you don't want to understand what the hand that your people had to play in destroying black people, destroying black wealth. Can you imagine everything is stripped from you, yet you still have the resilience to rise and make a name for yourself, and you end up being unalive? What message does that send to the rest of the community? Now, during slavery, what would happen is that, and whenever a slave would revolt, such as Nat Turner, when he revolted, what happened is that they hung Nat Turner, and after hanging Nat Turner, he was set as an example for other slaves who try to revolt. And so what they tried to do by unaliving these black people is they were sending a message that if the rest of you all try to do this, this is what's going to happen to you. And this is where the ghetto started to come in. This is where the redlining started to happen. This is where the gentrification started to happen. This is where the poverty in the black community started to grow. This is where you get your drugs from, as he talked about the war on drugs, and he wanted to pretend like he didn't know where that came from. This is where the drugs came from in the black community. And I understand that, yes, black people should be held accountable for taking drugs, but as Christians, we should know Jesus said that even though that offenses is going to take place into the world, there is more woe unto the one by which the offenses come. So there is a greater judgment on white America for planting those drugs in the black communities and in the ghettos that they created, in the poverty that they created. So much for black wealth, right? Now let's examine the other claim about the father figures. Why aren't there much father figures in the black community as there is supposed to be? Now, before I give my argument, I want to start off by saying the scriptures tell us that a father who does not provide for his home is worse than an infidel. So this is not taking off the responsibility of some black fathers who just choose not to be in their children's lives for no reason. But I'm going to be looking at the systematic oppression of why black fathers are not mainly in the home, where this mainly stems from. It's not making an excuse for all black fathers who, all of a sudden just don't want to be in their child's lives. But this is talking about where it came from to answer his question. Because everyone wants to talk about the effects, but no one wants to talk about the cause. Now, we're going to be looking at UCLA Law Review, the absent black father, race, the welfare child support system, and the cyclical nature of fatherlessness. Now, this is very significant. Let's pay attention to what this says. It says welfare laws and child support enforcement are closely related and intended to reduce government welfare expenditures. Welfare law requires that custodial parents, who are typically mothers seeking public aid, determine paternity by looking to the biological father of their children. Over the last 3 decades, evolving welfare policies have limited the scope of fatherhood and created more fatherless homes. In 1974, the Child Support Enforcement Act created the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement and required welfare beneficiaries to transfer their right to receive child support payments from the non-custodial parent to the government to offset welfare expenditures. After a series of amendments and new policies, Congress enacted the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993, where it noted the first step in securing child support is the establishment of paternity. Now the question is, what does all of this mean? Well, here is a summary. Welfare plus child support laws are connected. They were made to save the government money by making dads, usually non-custodial, pay instead of the state. Moms who need welfare usually have to name the child's father so the government can make him pay child support. Since the 1970s, laws like the Child Support Enforcement Act of 1974 and later ones in the 90s forced welfare recipients to establish and basically prove who the father is before getting aid. Now, why would they need aid to begin with? Because we just discussed why poverty is in the black community. Now, black people were flourishing and thriving before white people destroyed the wealth in their neighborhoods and created the ghettos in which they lived in. Continuing on, moms who need welfare usually have to name the child's father so the government can make him pay child support. I already said that. This system often hurt poor dads, and we already established why there is poverty, especially black fathers, by criminalizing them if they can't pay. And this goes back to his comment about, black people make up more of the jail cells. That's because systematically, black people are more likely to be convicted of crimes that they didn't even commit. And that's something that he wants to ignore because he's a racist, or he was a racist when he was still alive. And the reason why I'm addressing him as such, still using is because the legacy still lives on. These hurtful narratives are still being perpetuated. Now, continuing on, the government recoups costs. Guess that means they get the money back by taking child support payments from fathers instead of paying more welfare, which is needed, instead of giving reparations, which is needed. End result, what does this lead to? It can make fatherlessness worse because struggling dads get trapped in a cycle of debt and punishment and are incarcerated. And he mentioned that 50% of the prisoners in the United States today are black men. And we're going to look at those things.
Well, so they didn't start to burn and pillage until they decided, well, all right, we have to teach them a lesson. The Ku Klux decided we have to teach them a lesson. So actually, we as children didn't hear any noise or any shots the night of the 31st of May. But on June 1st, they began to systematically destroy neighborhoods. And they had airplanes dropping things down on people's houses, and they had made up their minds to clear the entire area of black people. So most of the people fled. When they saw houses burning and the streets behind them, they left. But my mother was determined not to flee, and she poured water on everything she could put water on, trying to make the house safe so it wouldn't burn. But the first thing they did when the militia came was to take all the men, and they took my 8-year-old brother too, to a place, bullpen or some place where they were holding all the black men. And we didn't know, because we lived on one side of town and they lived on the other, we didn't know they weren't doing the same thing. The militia, you have to obey the militia, so we thought they were locking up the non-blacks too. But it so happened that it didn't occur that way. What they did was to disarm and lock up all black men. And then they said to the mob, there's nothing out there now but women and children, so you can do whatever you want to do. And that was when the real terrible things started to happen, because they would invade your house. And my mother had a very strong will. She was a Tuskegee graduate, and she had been trained to teach. But she decided, well, we have to eat no matter what's happening out there in the world. So she had 3 triangular pots that you could put 3 pots on one gas eye on the stove. So she was cooking, and she made biscuits, and they were in the oven. Well, when the crowd came in to pillage and burn, they were infuriated, because here's this woman cooking cream of wheats and making applesauce and cooking biscuits instead of being terrified and running from us. So I think they thought they had to teach us a special lesson. So they took the food out. Of course, the children are cowering under this big oak table where my mother had put us. And then we saw them take our food out and throw it in the dirt. And then they came back and got the biscuits and took them out and stomped them in the dirt. And then they came back in to destroy whatever they didn't want to.
Black Americans, about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Okay, Let's talk about it. These are obviously racist claims, but I will respond to them as if Charlie Kirk were a reasonable person.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Wrong. Just 38% of America's prison population is black. That's according to the U.S. government. But it makes you wonder why Charlie feels the need to add an additional 12% to the black prison population. Could it be because his bigoted talking points only work if he exaggerates them? If Charlie were actually looking for the race that makes up half the prison population in the U.S., he'd look no further than white people at 57%.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
Wrong. The word "so" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes.
He's saying "so" as in therefore, as in one could conclude, but Charlie knows he's lying. Even if he hadn't just lied about the black prison population, Charlie is smart enough to know that correlation does not equal causation, but he's hoping that you don't know that. So he deploys the word "so" to make you think he's coming to an obvious conclusion.
Exactly.
So blacks...
Instead, he's making an illogical, racist leap. Charlie knows that we don't have usable data about who commits crimes. It's impossible to have that data since so many crimes go both unreported and or unsolved. Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment. What's painfully obvious is that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he so carelessly misquotes. He's interested in making bad faith arguments, something that becomes even more obvious in his next point.
Blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Wrong again, and loud this time. If Charlie were interested in honesty, he would have mentioned the other 1350 statistic. Yes, black people are about 13% of the population, but make up 53% of all criminal exonerations. In fact, black people make up 55% of all murder exonerations. Specifically, black people are more likely than any other group in this country to be convicted of crimes they did not commit. And then people like you have the nerve to parade these stats around as though they prove something. The reality is that you probably know these stats, but you leave them out on purpose, because to bring that stat into this conversation would make some people think. And that's the last thing a person like you wants.